Welcome, one and all, to this year's mid-year book freakout tag. This tag is a set of questions, basically just being like, what was the best book you read in this half of the year? What was the not-so-great book you read in this half of the year? And all the stuff in between. So we're just gonna hop on into it, shall we? Question 1. What is the best book you have read so far in 2022? Oh, well, okay. So this is a very hard thing to decide because I've read some great books so far. The award is probably not going to go to a single book, but probably going to go to the Stormlight Archive, which I finished this year. I love the Stormlight Archive so much. I cannot explain how much I love that series. But it's not one book. I think all the books are very strong. I particularly like Oathbringer. Rhythm of War has got a special place in my heart. We'll talk a little bit more Rhythm of War later, because one of the other questions pertains to that a little bit. Another contender for this category is Restart, which is a fiction book about this boy who has amnesia, or he falls off the roof of his house and cannot remember anything before that. And it's about his journey remembering who he was. And Restart is about him restarting his life, and he starts to realize that before he fell off the roof, he might not have been the best person out there, and it's his journey of restarting himself. So you got contenders, but there's no winner because that's impossible. Question 2. What is the best sequel you've read so far in 2022? Well, my friend. I'm taking this as the best book that is a sequel to another book. So we're gonna have to say probably one of the Stormlight Archive books, because I read the last 3 in that series this year, and they're all such good sequels. Like, they all build on each other so well. Like, after Way of Kings, you read Words of Radiance, and suddenly they open up more possibilities, and then suddenly Oathbringer happens, and the whole new realm of possibilities, and new characters, and you think it might get dry after a while with so much information, so much big world and characters, but it doesn't, because it reveals it to you in small bits, but it keeps the world feeling immense and massive. So it's immersive, but not too immersive to the point where you're drowning in it. Question 3. What is a new release that you haven't read but want to? Alright, so I'm going to cheat on this one, because the new release that I've wanted to read for a while, I've just started reading. So it is I Must Betray You by Ruta Sepetys, and she wrote The Fountains of Silence, which is a really good book. And I Must Betray You is about Romania during the 1980s. I'm not going to go too much into the plot, but it's a new release. It released a few months ago, and I've been wanting to read it for a little while. And I'm going to say that one because I just started reading it, and I'm really enjoying it. Question 4. What is your most anticipated release for the second half of the year? Probably off the top of my head is going to be Stellarlune, the Keeper of the Lost Cities book. Don't shout at me, KOTL. Book 9. The previous books ended on a bang, and I'm super excited to see where the series goes from there. That's all I'm going to say, because otherwise I have to spoil it. Also, if I forgot about some other books releasing the second half of the year, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean anything by it. So question 5 is, what is your biggest disappointment of this half of the year? And I don't like talking about bad books, or books I think are bad, because I like to keep it positive here on the channel, because I don't see the point of talking about a book that I think is bad when someone else might see it as good. I do like talking about books in a critical way, but not in a light of book is bad, you should hate you sort of lens, you know what I mean? But disappointment is going to take it as I didn't really like it as much as I was hoping to. So the disappointment of this half is The Great Gatsby. Not because it's technically a bad book, because I was hoping for something more than what I got. I didn't finish it. I got more than halfway through it, and at that point, I decided I wanted to read something else. So The Great Gatsby is highly praised for how well written and things like that it is. It's often used as an example for writers. So I was like, I need to read this book because everyone's talking about it. It's so good. And I went into it thinking I was going to get a really well-written story, really well-written characters, and to an extent you could consider them that way, but I feel like The Great Gatsby is trying to do something different than what I was hoping it was doing. It is creating an allegory for the American dream and things like that, and I was hoping for in-depth characters, maybe some really cool plot lines, and the plot line's fine, but the problem was with the book is that I just never really got very interested in it. And it disappointed me because I was hoping for something else. And maybe I should have realized or figured out what exactly The Great Gatsby was before reading it. And it's not a bad book. It's just not what I was hoping for in The Great Gatsby. You know what I mean? So, I understand why it's a really good example for writers, though, because it's got some really well, eloquently written passages and things like that, so, you know, say what you will. Question 6. What is the most surprising book you've read so far? Oh, I know! Cytonic. So, Cytonic by Brandon Sanderson I read in the beginning of this year, and it is the 3rd book in the Skyward series. So, Cytonic is an interesting book. I started off thinking I wasn't gonna like it, but then by the end I was like, whoa! Because Brandon Sanderson, even if at the beginning you're like, wait a second, I don't know if I like this, by the end, you almost always like the book because of something he does or some really creative way he subverts your expectations. Cytonic does this, and I'm not going to talk about what it does because it's spoilers, but Cytonic subverts your expectations and does things differently and surprises me. Question 7. Who is your favorite new author, debut or new to you? Alright, so we have a few new authors. So I have one for this. It is Bob by... Who are the authors? Wendy Mass and Rebecca Steed. So, they are not new authors, but I've never encountered them before, and they co-wrote this book. So, they were a duo, and they each wrote their own chapters and things like that, and from different points of view and things like that, and they put the story together, from what I can tell. But Bob is a very interesting story. It does things differently, and it was just like a sweet, whimsical story that was a really good breath of fresh air, like between like Stormlight books and things like that, like which are really heavy and great, but also 1,200 pages. And Bob was just like, you know, a really sweet, whimsical story that also had some like deeper emotional things that they talked about in the story. So I think it was just a really good book, and I'm curious to see what else they write. So question 8 is, what is your fictional crush? I don't have fictional crushes. I just don't. I just don't have crushes on characters. They're fictional characters made up by an author. It just doesn't happen. I don't know. That doesn't matter. Moving on. Number 9 is a question I can actually answer. Who is your new favorite character? So, I have quite a few characters I really like, and one that was new is Lizard or, I can't remember what her other name is, but in The Flames of Hope, there's a dragon named Lizard, and she's a really interesting character, and I'm not going to talk about her too much for spoilers, but Lizard has a really cool personality, and plays a really interesting role in the story. I thought she was really quite well built up, and actually more than Luna was, because usually Wings of Fire characters are often my favorites because of, the main protagonist has a really cool story, a really cool, like, internal monologue. I mean, I could say Sundew. I love Sundew so much as a character, because I reread all of Arc 3 this year, but I'm not going to say the ones I've already reread, because that's not fair. Question number 10. What books made you cry? Alright, that's enough emotion for one day. Moving on. So, in all seriousness, Rhythm of War made me cry. Or it brought me close to tears, because books don't usually make me cry, because my brain does this thing when I read where it's like, oh, interesting, that character died, so the plot could be furthered in this way, and the writer did that. I often go see the book from a writer's perspective instead of a reader, so if I say a character dies or something sad happens, I don't cry usually, because I'm too more invested in that was a really interesting way to subvert the expectations of this and that and that and that. But Rhythm of War got me so invested in the story that I was like near tears like 3 times in the climax, like when character B died. Okay, fine. Spoilers. Big spoiler warning, right for the next like 10 seconds. When we got the scene where the Stormfather lets Eshonai ride around the world of the storm. Eshonai died in, like, book 2, but we got the scene where we see Eshonai's point of view as she's dying, and the Stormfather holds her soul before death and lets her ride around with the storm one last time, or lets her ride around with the storm so you can see the world that she never got to see. And that nearly brought me to tears, man. So sad, because I'd never been too attached to Eshonai before this, but that just made me like go, oh, because that's what I needed, because I was like, oh, Eshonai always wanted to see the world, but she never got to, oh no, and then I saw that, I was like, she did get to see the world before she died. But yeah, and then there are a few other moments in that book which really, really hit home. That book was the only Stormlight book, in fact, that did this. And I think it's because we've had so long with some of these characters that once these things happen, it makes you feel good. And there's like, yeah, so many characters did so many cool things. No more spoilers anymore. Yeah. Question 11. What is one book that made you happy? A lot of books have had moments in them, because a lot of books, have like sad parts, climactic parts. A few books I've read recently had really parts that were just happy. For some characters, it just made me happy, or made me smile when it happened. Rhythm of War did that with some characters when they get over some mental trauma, or not get over it, but start to dig themselves out of a hole. Or get themselves out of a hole. Question 12. What is the most beautiful book that you've bought or received in this half of the year? So, we missed the window for the Way of Kings Leatherbound, which I got last year after the mid-year book Freakout tag, but it's right over there. It's the most beautiful book I own. Actually, you're not going to be able to see it very well. I'll show pictures on screen. It's very pretty. It is my pride and joy. But this year, just the ordinary Stormlight books actually are just really well designed. Also, really good like art inside. Like you'll see, Rhythm of War, for example, has lots of really good interior art. There's a whole pull-out map, all color, and there's also a map inside here. Awesome end papers. Just in general, a really beautiful book. And to finish off this mid-year book Freakout tag, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? So I want to read the Wax and Wane series by Brandon Sanderson, the series to Mistborn. Be very cool. I also want to try to read some of Brandon Mull, not Brandon Sanderson, Brandon Mull's work, because I've read a bunch of it in the past, but I want to read more of it. I want to read some of his, I want to reread some of his books, but I also want to read Dragon Watch for the first time. I also want to maybe return to some Rick Riordan, maybe read some of his Percy Jackson series, because I read Percy Jackson, but the Heroes of Olympus and Trials of Apollo I never really got into, but I want to try those again. And I'm hoping to reread a bunch of books. Basically, I'm trying to reread a lot of books that I really liked, and I want to see if I still like them. I want to reread Aragon, I want to reread maybe some Lord of the Rings stuff, or just read more, like, Tolkien stuff related to. I'm going to try to read the Silmarillion. I don't have a concrete plan, I just want to really read some cool stuff, try to read diversely. I talked about that in a recent video, and just keep reading. But that was the mid-year book Freakout tag. Thank you so much for watching. What about you? Did you have any, do you want to answer these questions yourself? Or just comment down below being like, oh yeah, these are my answers to some of these questions, or just, I think this, I think that. Totally open to hear your opinions. And yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. I hope your day is full of wonder.